My Lords, as we approach the end of committee, I think that it's been refreshing, even though we are not in the main chamber, that there's been so much general, consensual, constructive discussion in this Grand Committee. I think that we've had a lot of very interesting, erudite, probing amendments. Erudite in as much as they've been really thoughtful, really tried to get to the heart of what we think is happening with this bill, what we need to see changed. And I think it's been enjoyable working across parties, from the front bench and the opposition, and also with backbenchers, crossbenchers, non-affiliated and so on. So I've got that out of the way so that I can say I do not know why on earth the main opposition are obsessed with sick influencers and have moved this amendment, and I therefore want to talk on it. And one of the reasons why I want to, in all seriousness, is because I think actually it misses the target completely, which is, and it draws together for me some of the issues that I think are why I've had some worries about the bill in general. So let me explain. So I am speaking against amendments 125A, 129A, focusing on the problem of sickfluencers and those using electronic communications and the internet to help people circumvent eligibility checks, as the amendment says. I don't think that this should be made into any kind of an offence, criminal offence, or so on, with, by the way, a threat of up to a year in prison, according to the amendments. But I do think that we have instead a cultural problem of encouraging and inciting increasing numbers to identify themselves as sick and in need of state support. And I think that's where the focus should be, not on these kind of so-called malevolent sick influencers corrupting the nation. I'm worried that these amendments miss the target and potentially distract us and our gaze from where we should be targeting. So, for example, in relation to circumventing eligibility checks, I'm sure my noble lords, or maybe my noble lords, are aware of a recent story from Oxford University, where the university has admitted that because of a long waiting list and a logjam for diagnosis in relation to ADHD, the university has decided that it will use as supporting documentation a referral to a GP or to an NHS assessment service as sufficient for students to get special concessions in terms of exams and assessments. This is one of our top academic institutions allowing young people to circumvent eligibility checks, or the eligibility checks that were there until recently. And they can actually gain benefits from this. And of course, gaining those benefits with a much lower eligibility check is inevitably likely to incentivise self-diagnosis amongst those students. And I think it's in that context that we've seen actually the growth of sickfluencers. Indeed, the videos with the hashtag mental health have amassed something like 17 billion views on TikTok over recent years, according to an academic study. But they have been about self-diagnosis. They have not been about how we can rip off PIPs. They have broadly a cultural problem. What we're seeing here is, and this is my worry, is the growth of what one psychiatrist has labelled the mental health industrial complex, increasing numbers of people prepared to enter into this discussion about what is mental health beyond the medical profession. And that's often comprising of a plethora of therapists who are unregulated, well-being experts, even mental health charities with huge budgets, and some of those budgets coming from government contracts, who have, in my view, got us into a situation where increasing numbers of people are culturally incentivised to view the trials and tribulations of life and the feelings of unhappiness and depression through the pathologised prism of medical labels. Actually something which Tony Blair talked about last year, and which I uncharacteristically agreed with Tony Blair on. It's these sickfluencers that I'd argue are leading to a huge spike in numbers adopting an identity of mental fragility and illness, and creating an increasing cohort of citizens demanding official diagnosis, statementing NHS interventions, pharmacological and therapeutic treatment, and of course then welfare support. And that's actually what's fueling and feeding into what I think some of the controversies around personal independent payments, the increasing numbers on disability living allowance, and so on and so forth. So I'm trying to avoid that particular row about cuts in welfare causing such consternation for the government at the moment. But my point is, it's not online sickfluencers, or that's such a stupid word, who've created this culture of encouraging people to view themselves as in need of support. And I have a lot of sympathy actually with the Health Secretary Wes Streeting, who conceded that mental health conditions are being overdiagnosed, meaning that the number of working age adults who we officially designate as incapacitated and in need of various forms of state support are being effectively written off as young people, and that it's to do with overdiagnosis. And so that's where I think all our energy should be. And I suppose one of the reasons why I've kicked back against a lot of Part 2 of this bill is that and some parts of it which I find frankly draconian overreach, as being a sledgehammer to crack a nut, is I think there's a much deeper problem of why the welfare bill is so huge, that goes beyond people fraudulently acting in relation to benefits. Finally, on this amendment, I think I'd be more sympathetic if the opposition had taken on what I think are real problems here, which is effectively all party governments, I mean, you know, the previous government and this one, have pushed official awareness campaigns, which I do think encourage ever greater number of people to see themselves as in need of welfare, and actually does provide a script for people to follow. I mean, I've written extensively about this in a different context. You know, children in playgrounds using the language of therapeutic language of mental ill health, they got that from adults. They didn't. And so what we have to ask, what's going on? In fact, Dr. Alistair Sandhouse, a neuropsychiatrist at Maudsley and author of a new book, No More Normal Mental Health in an Age of Overdiagnosis, notes, the more people are aware of a particular illness, the more people start to identify with the symptoms. And I do think that awareness campaigns, officially backed awareness campaigns, are really problematic. I've just written the foreword for a new pamphlet entitled Suffer the Children, Why Having a Mental Health Professional in Every School is Not the Answer, which I think is brilliantly written by Lucy Beeney. But one thing she notes is that schools now have a veritable army of educational mental health practitioners, emotional literacy, support assistants, mental health first aiders and so on. And the outcome of this increase is more and more pupils describing themselves as suffering from mental ill health. So my point is just that the sick influencers are just, I mean, it's almost like it's a meme that the opposition has picked up as thinking this is very important. I think they're a trivial, non-important part of this debate. However, if the opposition would like to consider that the thing which is really influencing more and more people to consider that they need welfare when perhaps they don't and shouldn't have it, it's actually these broader cultural trends, and I'd be much more sympathetic if they went down that path. It's the last time I'm going to speak, by the way, in case you think that was a second reading speech, but I've been wanting to get it off my chest for a while.